Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and I am so grateful that you could join us today. And we're going to spend some time this first hour, spending a little bit of time talking about day one of the Republican National Convention. I'm going to move on to some other very important issues in the news. But as a program note, let me mention that next hour, Professor Paul Kengor will be with us, and we'll talk about his book, The Devil Karl Marx, which is kind of provocatively titled, but it really is one of the best books I've seen on Karl Marx and Marxism, and then moves on to everything from a variety of other Marxist organizations. And one of the things that I've posted today is just one very small section from his book, which he put in the American Spectator, Why Not Cancel Karl Marx? I mentioned that yesterday, if you happen to be listening, because after all, you always hear from our liberal progressive friends, especially those on the radical left, that we need to get rid of anybody that could be accused of any kind of bigotry or bias against Jewish people, against black people, against women, whatever. Karl Marx checks every one of those boxes, by the way. And, of course, we're also told by professors that we can't pay attention to those dead white Europeans, of which he is one. But, again, he gets a pass because, of course, he is part of the left. But, nevertheless, I think you will appreciate that column. And the book really goes into a lot of detail, so we will spend some time at 1 o'clock talking about that. 2 o'clock, excuse me, we have Eric Metaxas with us, and he's got these fun books. This one, Donald and Fake News, but I'm sure he'll probably have a few comments about the Democratic Convention, the Republican Convention, and kind of where we go there. But since the focus is on media, and he's been on both sides of the media, both as a talk show host and as a person that has been interviewed in the media, I thought we'll spend some time talking about that. And we certainly will benefit from that as well. Last night, of course, was the Republican National Convention, and it was pretty obvious from the outset that there was a desire to answer the issue of racism. Now, there are some reasons why that was the case. If you look at the lineup, Herschel Walker is there, really talking about some very important issues. Senator Tim Scott is there. A Democrat from Georgia, Vernon Jones, is there. Even when you move away from people that are African American, you can look at Nikki Haley, who comes from an Indian background. And so there was, I think, an attempt to say, wait a minute, the Republican Party can be a party of inclusion. Number two, especially Herschel Walker. Matter of fact, if you want to, go out on YouTube. They actually have posted, C-SPAN did that. I'm glad they did. The very short message by Herschel Walker. Always loved him as a football player. Did not anticipate such a heartfelt speech, which we'll talk about in just a minute in that regard. And so in some respects, you had quite a lineup that really tried to address that issue. Jim Garrity said that actually the best case that could be made came from no names. And I'll mention a few of those a little bit later. One was Nurse Amy Johnson Ford. One I will talk about, Natalie Harper, because she was talking about the right to try. Of course, we mentioned Vernon Jones, but again, most people outside of Georgia would not know him. Andrew Pollock, he's the father of one of the children, or teenagers, I guess I should say, that was killed in Parkland, but instead didn't blame NRA, but blamed a variety of other things, including what he called the scumbag gunman who did so. And and even Maximo Alvarez, who was giving us a little bit of an idea of what it's like to live under a socialist regime. So some of those individuals certainly were making a case as well. Might also mention there was a really powerful piece at one point, didn't see this coming, a panel that was actually in the White House. It had actually been taped earlier in the Oval Office, in which it was the different hostages, about 50 different hostages that have been freed, including Pastor Andrew Brunson, who we've talked about on this program before, who was freed from Turkey, some of the others freed from Iran, Venezuela, India, and the rest. So there were some positives. Before I get into the substance, let's talk about style. There were a few people that turned it up a notch. It reminds me of a conversation I've had with Steve, my producer here. Steve, remember when we had Brigitte Gabriel on, and you said she started at 10, and you can't go any lower when you start out at 10. Well, Kimberly Gorfil, I always have trouble with that last name, they said she started the speech at 11 and turned it up to 22. I mean, there was shouting the entire time. So and I would have to say that's probably true a little bit of Donald Trump Jr., but not as bad. I mean, the worst was this. And I just couldn't help think of one time when Steve and I were talking about this, when Brigitte Gabriel was on last time, and we love her, but she starts out and she is just in full force. You know, when you're at 10, where can you go? I mean, you can't go up, and she never went down. And Kimberly Guilfoyle didn't do that either. So that's a little bit about the style issue. That's why more than a few people said we probably could have done without those. Matter of fact, one of the other ones here, Tyler O'Neill, put it this way: Donald Trump Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle came out of the gate rather strong and forceful and left a powerful impression. Maybe a little bit too much of an impression, but nevertheless, that was the case. And so this was an attempt to try to address some of those possible failings, especially since race is on the minds of individuals. And so you could go, first of all, to Vernon Jones. Did not know much about him. He is a Democrat. He calls himself a lifelong Democrat. He's a state representative in the state of Georgia. I might mention this again in the last half of our third hour, just in case some of our Georgia people know him. But a couple points he made real quickly. Number one, he says, as you can see, I'm a man of color. I'm a lifelong Democrat, too. But he says the Democratic Party does not want black people to leave the mental plantation. So that was kind of interesting. Went on to talk about the record of Joe Biden. And I'll leave that, but other than saying that Joe Biden has been in Congress for 47 years, and what do we have to show for it? Meanwhile, he then focused on the fact, and I was unaware of this until he mentioned it, that President Trump has guaranteed funding for what are called historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, for 10 years. He said that's something that has never happened in our history. He also talked about Donald Trump champions school choice to ensure that no child, no matter their race or zip code, is left behind. Then he also credited the president with having built the most inclusive economy ever, with record low unemployment for African Americans. He also mentioned the opportunity zones, which had been pitched earlier by a couple of others. We'll also talk about that with Tim Scott when we come back from the break, and also by Scott Turner, who is actually from this area, who is part of that administration as well. And then also talked about Donald Trump and signing the criminal justice reform. Because if nothing else, he said these was necessary because of some of the policies that were enacted by Joe Biden. And I'll get to that a little bit later because that was something that was explained in more detail by Tim Scott. One of the things that also I thought was maybe a negative, again, with Donald Trump Jr., is number one, because he's the son of Donald Trump, it takes away the nepotism argument that I think some people have wanted to use of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Number two, Donald Trump Jr. tends to just make a statement, but he never really gives any justification for the statement. I recognize his was more to just red meat, get people excited. But if you're going to convince people to come to your side, you have to make a statement and explain why, and that might have been missing there as well. Let's come back and talk about a couple of the other speeches. Some of them really, I think, hit their mark. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One striking difference between Europe and America has been the temptation many European countries to fall into totalitarianism. Dennis Prager reminds us that after World War I, many of these countries embraced communism, fascism, or Nazism, and there's a very good reason why. The primary beliefs that give rise to meaning in life were patriotism and the Judeo-Christian religion. The senseless slaughter during the Great War, as it was called, challenged both of these foundations. National identity was seen as the cause of the war, and religion was deemed unnecessary and perhaps a relic of the past. This void was left filled with communism in Russia, fascism in Italy, and Nazism in Germany. In the U.S., there were communists and many other activists promoting their totalitarian temptations, but they never took root. Americans did not lose their faith in religion, especially in Christianity. Patriotism not only flourished, but Dennis Prager reminds us that the words "under God" were even inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance recited daily in American schools. But the baby boomers born after World War II began to challenge God and country. These students were indoctrinated into secularism and anti-Americanism. The generations that followed them grew up in a country that was less religious and more likely to criticize America's government and history. Today we have a void that is similar to the one found in Europe a century ago. Most likely the totalitarian temptation today will be a leftist totalitarianism that promotes leftist political correctness and bans free speech and religion. There are many reasons to pray for a spiritual revival, but one of the more important reasons is to prevent this country from falling for the totalitarian temptation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again. I thought for just a few more minutes I might mention just a few of the speeches that took place last night, and you can watch them in their entirety. One that was very heartfelt, and I really did appreciate it, from Herschel Walker, in which this particular article says he drew from his personal experiences with the president to defend Donald Trump of the charges of racism, and he was there in part for that, but he also made the case that people make this comment really don't know what they're talking about. And he talks about the fact that he had known him for 37 years, and he says, I don't just mean casually. He became, as you might remember, the owner of the United States Football League, the New Jersey Generals, and talks about the fact that when Trump bought the team, he learned the history of the team, he learned about the players, the details. Oftentimes when he was in a boardroom, he would be really being quite articulate about some of the issues, but also then pointed out that if the kids called on the phone, he would stop everything and take the phone call, and said that family was a high priority. Then Herschel Walker said, I watched him treat janitors and security guards and waiters the same way he would treat a VIP. He made them feel special because he knew they were. And so he talks about the fact that, and this has probably been true of what most people perceived of Donald Trump in the past. Of course, once he ran for the presidency, all of a sudden he was an elitist and he was a racist and all sorts of other things. He was just as comfortable going out on a crew talking with people that were building the building as he was with the people that were going to be the ultimate owners of that building. But nevertheless, some of that has been lost, and so Herschel Walker talked about it. But then he really got personal. He says, it hurts my soul to hear the terrible names that people call Donald. The worst one, he said, is racist.
I take it as a personal insult that people would think that I've had a 37-year friendship with a racist. People that think that don't know what they're talking about. And then Herschel Walker says, growing up in the Deep South, I've seen racism up close. I know what it is, and it isn't Donald Trump. So if nothing else, I would encourage you to watch that if you have a chance. It's pretty short, but it was very well done and surprised me for sure. One of the things that also was part of this last night was the desire to address this issue of racism from different angles, one coming from the former governor of South Carolina and also the former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, who, by the way, it's pretty obvious running for the presidency in 4 years. But her comment was, America is not a racist country. This is personal for me. I am the proud daughter of Indian immigrants. My father wore a turban. My mother wore a sari. I was a brown girl in a black and white world. It was difficult, but my parents never gave in to grievance or hate. They grew up, and she grew up with being the first minority and first female governor of South Carolina. And she even condemned the Democrats for turning a blind eye towards the riots and the rage that took place. She also did a very good contrast between the reaction to George Floyd and the horrific killing in the Charleston church. You might remember that. And that is where an individual goes into the church, listens to the message, and then goes and starts shooting people in this African-American church. And so Nikki Haley said, our state came face to face with evil. After the horrific event, we didn't turn against each other. We came together, black and white, Democrat and Republican. Together, we made the hard choices needed to heal and remove a divisive symbol peacefully and respectfully. And so that was another point that was made. Some of the lesser-known people also, I thought, helped us understand some of those issues. Natalie Harper is a bone cancer survivor who was brought on simply because she benefited from this right-to-try policy that Donald Trump has implemented. That has made so much sense to me. If you're dying of cancer and you want to try an experimental drug, why shouldn't you be allowed to do so? And she said, after 5 years, I was the victim of a notoriously deadly medical error. I survived, but only to be diagnosed with a rare and terminal bone cancer. And she says, you know how people love to talk about healthcare being a human right. A right to what? Well, I'll tell you, to them, it's a right to marijuana, opioids, the right to die with dignity. And he says, I was told I was a burden to my family and to my country, and that by choosing to die early, I would actually be saving the lives of others by preserving resources for them. I mean, again, duty to die. We've talked about that on this program before. And when I failed the chemotherapies that were on the market, no one wanted me in their clinical trials. I made them look bad. They didn't give me the right to try experimental treatments, but you did, Mr. President. And without you, I would have died waiting for them to be approved. So, incredible story. And while I'm talking about someone else that we didn't know very well but are getting to know, the couple that pointed the guns at the protesters. Now, this article comes from Reuters. And we've seen some pictures before where the two individuals, Mark McCluskey and Patricia McCluskey, are not exactly handling the handgun and the AR-15 in an appropriate manner, as I've said before. It's obvious they didn't go to any NRA safety schools or things of that nature. But this one picture that the Reuters found, I've never seen it before, actually shows her, that is Patricia McCluskey, pointing her gun at someone who, by the way, is pointing back at her with one of those extended microphones that does look a little bit like a gun. And so I don't know what preceded it, what ended it, but it's maybe illustrates a little bit more why this particular couple has been cited. But nevertheless, they were there last night, and she was saying, no matter where you live, your family will not be safe in this radical Democrats' America. A little bit later, Mark McCluskey said, President Trump will defend the God-given right of every American to protect their home and families. But again, they were somebody you might not have expected. Both of them are lawyers, have been supportive of Democratic candidates, but they did indeed shout at the protesters, pointed weapons, and as a result, as he points out, that the authorities have not charged anyone that came onto their property, which he referred to as an out-of-control mob, but they have charged them with a felony. We'll see where this goes, but nevertheless, I got a little different perspective when I saw the Reuters picture of her actually pointing the gun at one of the protesters, which I thought was an illustration, again, of something that could have been pretty provocative and fortunately did not end badly. One last one before I take a break. I was honestly thinking that Tim Scott would start off the night. He actually was the keynote speech and the end of the night. Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, and he told this incredible story of his grandfather who actually, because they had to pick cotton, dropped out of school in the 3rd grade and never learned to read and write. So here, his grandfather did not know how to read and write, and now his grandfather then sees him elected first to the House of Representatives and then to the United States Senate. And the line that I think most people will remember from the night was, "Our family went from cotton to Congress in one generation, one lifetime." And so it's really a powerful little story about becoming the first African-American to be elected to both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And if nothing else, of course, the only African-American in the Republican Party. And then quoted a little bit from, of course, Joe Biden. Joe Biden said that if a black man didn't vote for him, he wasn't truly black. Joe Biden said that black people are a monolithic community. It was Joe Biden who said poor kids can be just as smart as white kids. Of course, all the mistakes that Joe Biden has made. But then points out that in 1994, according to Tim Scott, Joe Biden, then Senator Biden, led the charge on a crime bill that put millions of black Americans behind bars. President Trump's criminal justice reform law fixed many of the disparities Biden created and made our system more fair and just for Americans. So counterpoint on that. He also brought up the same thing that Vernon Jones brought up. While Biden criticized the historically black colleges and universities, he said, quote, "Trump signed into law historically high funding for HBCUs," that would be historically black colleges and universities. And so he concluded by saying, "Make no mistake, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want a cultural revolution, a fundamentally different America. If we let them, they will turn our country into a socialist utopia, and history has taught us that path only leads to pain and misery, especially for hardworking people hoping to rise." So just a couple of things that were mentioned last night, and again, you can find many of these clips from YouTube and other places if you would like to hear some of the speeches. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what took place, because I suspect you, like a lot of people last week, did not watch the convention. And so we wanted to at least mention a few things that were said there. When we come back from the break, though, there is a real concern about what's out there on the streets. The amount of rioting taking place in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the ongoing rioting that has been taking place in Portland have led to a couple of things. First of all, it has made the issue of security front and center. Number two, it is very obvious that in 2020, more guns will have been sold in any time in history. We'll talk about that. And we also can look at some of the evidence that defunding the police is already starting to increase dramatically some of the crime statistics. That is supposedly an unintended consequence, but it's not an unexpected one, and we'll talk about that right after this.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again,
is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. About half an hour from now, Professor Paul Kengor will be with us as we talk about the devil and Karl Marx. We'll look at Karl Marx's history as well as the impact of Marxism even up to our present day. So I think you will really benefit from that book, which goes into incredible detail. He's been on the program with us many times before. We've posted one of his very good articles on why not cancel Karl Marx, but I thought I would also go to the second article I've posted, and that is The Election is About Security. Mark Lauder is the author of this particular piece, and he actually works with the Trump administration in communications, at least. And so in some respects, you're going to get, of course, the Trump bias. But the point he's making, which I would agree with, is simply this, something that Kelly Shackelford said a couple of weeks ago. They've done some various kinds of surveys, and usually when you ask people what are some of the most important issues, the economy is always near the top. Kind of a reminiscent of James Carville back in 1992. It's the economy, stupid. And if the economy's doing well, oftentimes the president is reelected. And what is so far down on the list is to not even register hardly are things like climate change and a number of others, which were kind of front and center at the Democratic convention. But what has become very interesting and a very significant anomaly is the word security or safety shows up a lot in these surveys, and that is the case. Now, Mark Lauder says that this election will come down to a single word with multiple meanings: security. First of all, your economic security, security for you and your family, the national security for America and all of the rest. And of course, that relates very much to the economic issue, but economic security is seen as a little different than that, because the point that he makes here is that there is going to be a real difference, which even surfaced last night in the first night of the Republican convention compared to the Democratic convention, and that is Joe Biden supported NAFTA and TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and of course Donald Trump has not. And so that's a very clear difference, and it's not necessarily something Joe Biden has been running away from. If nothing else, I saw somebody who said they were going to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump. A very prominent Republican said this because of TPP. So it's not like this is going to be an issue where they're going to say, well, I've grown and I don't agree with that anymore. I mean, you really do see some very clear policy differences on that. Also, of course, the Green New Deal and many others in terms of, are we going to have economic security? Which it will be interesting to see, because I'm expecting this, for people to, on the one hand, complain that Donald Trump did not spend enough, and then turn right around and say Donald Trump has run up these massive deficits, which has come in large part because of the pandemic. But nevertheless, that issue of economic security is the first one. But then there are some others, and the other one that is most significant is, of course, security in the domestic world, and then a third one, security from the foreign world, because it is, I think, very clear that, as Mark Lauder points out, American cities are burning as rioters and looters and anarchists have taken control of some of these cities. And I'm going to get into that more in just a minute when we talk about what even happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin yesterday. But he goes on to then make the case that there's a reason why many major police organizations support President Donald Trump. They know he supports the men and women who run toward the danger, protect our loved ones and children, and keep our neighborhoods safe. So that's kind of his argument there. So one is economic security, the other is sort of domestic security, and the number three, of course, foreign security, and that is the argument that, again, Donald Trump has wanted to rebuild the military, wanted to disconnect us, as the argument was even made last night, from senseless wars and those kinds of things, and ended the Iranian deal, which again is going to be a real counterpoint, I think, if these debates indeed take place, trying to destroy the ISIS caliphate and a variety of other things, the killing of Qasem Soleimani, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So we'll see where that takes us. But security is surfacing in these polls in a way that you haven't necessarily seen before. Which brings me to another point I wanted to bring up, and that is yesterday, of course, we talked about the shooting of this individual, Jacob Blake, in the back, and the riots that have taken place. I'll leave that one for just a minute to come on to something else, and that is you've had rioters and looters, destroying all sorts of buildings. Perhaps you've even seen some of these pictures and these memes up there where they say, "We support Black Lives Matter," and the windows are knocked out. Now, somebody's been saying, just because you say that doesn't mean that you are going to be exempt from all sorts of property damage. And once again, when you see that the rioters seemingly outnumber the police, you expect more rioting to take place. But what was very interesting is you have a number of armed residents. And if you see some of these individuals, sometimes they're in camo, maybe they have some kind of body armor, but they're out there with guns as well. And one of them told a reporter, "We're not trying to protect the government." They said, "If you want to tear down those lampshades, go for it. I guess it's not my speed, but it's the government that messed up with you guys." I'm cleaning up the language a little bit. "It's not the civilians. These guys didn't do anything, so we don't want to hurt these people." So what has happened is in this city of about 100,000, there are a number now of armed residents that have come out into the streets as well to try to protect some of the businesses. And we've seen some of this happening before in other parts of the country, even in the old days in Los Angeles, where you had the riots that broke out after the beating of Rodney King. You had, in some cases, I remember one story of these Koreans that were sitting out there with rifles. Actually, they were BB guns, but nobody knew the difference. But just having somebody sit out there in a lawn chair with what looked like a rifle kept the rioters from going into some of those businesses. And you're starting to see some of this, which, again, as much as I understand it from a personnel point of view, very dangerous, because individuals that are out there with guns in their hands, police force, have been trained all their lives on what is or is not an appropriate use of force and what is a life-threatening situation. They don't even get it right all the time. Can you imagine people that have even less training, how some of this vigilante justice, which is completely understandable if you wanted to protect your home, goes back to the comment of the couple there in St. Louis, when people come onto your grounds and you're afraid they're going to destroy your house or even kill you. I can understand why you would walk out there with a gun, but you can see what's starting to happen up there in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Which brings me to one other point we'll take before the break, and that is, it turns out, and this comes from Brandon Morse, it's the year of the gun. I'll just read this piece because it comes and I think summarizes it only so well. Using the FBI's National Instant Background Check System, National Shooting Sports Foundation, a firearm trade association, estimates that there will be over 12 million guns bought in the first 7 months of 2020, up more than 70% over the same time span in 2019. This number is likely to include nearly 5 million first-time gun owners so far this year. That is probably the biggest surge in gun ownership in the history of America. It's also worth noting, according to this article, that that number will likely be higher if gun shops hadn't been trying to keep up with the demand for months. If you tend to like to shoot guns, you'll notice that it's almost impossible to find 9mm ammunition right now, in part because of the supply chains being affected by the coronavirus, but also just by the sheer demand. And we have now 5 million more new gun owners that you did not see coming. And again, this article goes on to say that the surge in gun ownership is likely driven by two issues. One is obviously the riots that police have neither the resources nor the personnel to handle. We're watching rioters bring belonging to Antifa and Black Lives Matter accost innocent people and destroy property indiscriminately. This is only telling Americans that their best bet is themselves, and they're now buying firearms out of necessity. The other fact, they say in this article, is that it's an election season, and the threat of a Democrat taking over has made those who wish to own a gun believe that it's now or never. And even though Democrats have been relatively quiet on the gun control issue, nevertheless, I think those two particular factors are why 2020 will be the year of the gun. Let's take a break. I want to come back and talk about a couple of other issues. In particular, by defunding the police or reducing the number of police officers, do you think crime will go up or crime will go down? I think we have a pretty good estimate on that. And some people have actually run the numbers on the number of increased additional crimes that will take place in Seattle over the next year. And we'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, protesters out in the streets are saying defund the police, but politicians are saying, no, we don't mean to defund the police, but we do want to rather dramatically increase the number of police officers out there for racial reasons, because fewer police, less possibility that police interacting with minority members of our society that could go wrong. And besides, we need to take money that we've been spending on police and spend it instead on trying to develop various community programs. But what are the unintended but I think very expected side effects of lowering the number of police officers out there on the streets. Seattle is really on the cutting edge of this. The city council voted to enact what one New York Times reporter said and called the most ambitious overhauls of policing in America. And Joseph Sullivan, in a piece, which I'm going to have mentioned next week in one of my commentaries, posts this chart. And so those of you that happen to be watching right now can see the chart is a little bit arresting because it points out that by taking 100 police off of the streets in Seattle, and that's what they plan to do through layoffs and attrition, you can then go to a study that appeared last year in the Journal of Public Economics and conclude that you can look at those numbers for each police officer that's not on the street, multiply it by 100, and concluded that over the next year there will be 10 additional murders, 53 additional rapes, and 198 additional robberies. Now, the pushback from that, which I also acknowledge in my commentary, could be, well, it is possible that these are national averages and that won't surface in Seattle. Possibly, but it's taken a big risk. And so on the one hand, by taking those officers off the street, you have less opportunity as a deterrent on murder, rape, robbery, and a variety of other things. One of the things that's not mentioned in this piece by Joseph Sullivan, but it occurred to me, by taking fewer officers off the streets, you also are going to have fewer traffic stops. Now, the positive could be, well, then there are fewer possibilities of interaction between a police officer and somebody that's African American or Hispanic American. Maybe that's helpful. But the flip side of that is that means you're going to have fewer people that are going to be catching speeders, drunk drivers, or distracted drivers who just always are looking at their cell phone, which means even driving in Seattle could be more dangerous. And I think the logical implication from everything we know from research that has been done is simply that by reducing the number of police officers out there on the streets, you're going to increase the amount of crime. That's exactly what we've seen in many of these cities, in Chicago, New York, Seattle, and others where that has taken place. And something else, which I just thought I'd mention in passing, you may not like it when the police officer pulls you over for speeding or something else, but they're also catching people that are very dangerous, drunk drivers and people that are driving erratically and shouldn't maybe have a license in the first place. And so, again, you can see that there is not a positive future by taking more and more people off of the streets who are in law enforcement. But let's get to another issue. And I do smile at this because Gary Bauer pointed out that Donald Trump announced that the FDA has now decided to use an emergency use of convalescent plasma treatments. And I think that is very positive. But the reason I'm smiling is because the Wall Street Journal, who haven't exactly been a fan of Donald Trump, say the FDA's good plasma decision, ignore Trump's tweet. This is the right decision based on science. It's very reminiscent, if you've been listening to this program, of a particular article that came out in the Boston Globe, you might remember a while back, in which these individuals that were the Harvard public health area in the Harvard University public health department, I guess is what it was, said ignore Donald Trump, but send the kids back to school. They got the same kind of thing here. Ignore Donald Trump's tweets, but at the same time, what actually the Trump administration is doing and the FDA is doing is right. So it's just amazing how sometimes Donald Trump always seems to be in the middle of it. Because if you have not seen, this weekend he sent out a tweet saying that the deep state and the Food and Drug Administration was thwarting the development of therapies and vaccines in order to sabotage his reelection. No, they didn't. But nevertheless, that's the kind of stuff that comes out on a regular basis. But I do love the editorial board. There's no evidence for this claim or that the FDA is making decisions based on anything but science. But there is ample evidence that convalescent plasma may be effective and the potential benefits outweigh the risks. Now, you might say, what is that? Well, that's where we take plasma from somebody who actually has had COVID-19, and then we process it and put it into somebody who is facing some of the negative effects of COVID-19. And if you're not familiar, Again, just a little bit of history of science here, history of medicine. Convalescent plasma has been used since the 19th century to treat infectious diseases like smallpox, the Spanish flu, which is what this is like, Ebola, and a number of others. And so in some respects, it's used to help sick patients mount a stronger immune reaction by giving them plasma that contains the antibodies from recovering patients. So I think it's really a good thing. And again, let's give Donald Trump some credit for this as well. The president did say to deliver treatments and vaccines to save lives, we're removing unnecessary barriers and delays, not by cutting corners, but by marshaling the full power of the federal government. Mr. President, I agree with that one. He also goes on to say we've provided $48 million to fund the Mayo Clinic study that tested the efficacy of convalescent plasma for patients with the virus. Through this study, over 100,000 Americans have already enrolled to receive this treatment. It has proven effective to reduce mortality by 35%. And today, I once again urge all Americans who have recovered from the virus to go to coronavirus.gov and sign up to donate plasma, please. And I would agree with that. And I would certainly hope that many of you that know individuals that have recovered might do that, because that is the case. Now, why did this have to be rushed through? Well, it turns out that the gold standard in medicine is a double-blind study, and where you have to have a placebo standard. But it has been very difficult to do that for a variety of reasons. I won't go into all the details there. And some of the studies seem to show some promise with plasma, some do not, and I think some of that has to do with how the person's immune system is strengthened or already weakened when it's done. But nevertheless, it is another very effective treatment, and once again, let's give credit where credit is due. The Trump administration tried to clear some of the barriers out so that maybe we can save some more lives, and that's a good thing. Okay, just about ending this hour, and this time yesterday I talked about Jerry Falwell Jr. Okay, I'll mention it one more time. If you haven't been paying attention, Jerry Falwell Jr. resigned, then a few hours ago rescinded his resignation, and now has resigned again from Liberty University. And in his article in the Wall Street Journal, he said he'd been pushed out of Liberty University by self-righteous people. Don't you just hate those self-righteous people? And if nothing else, just a reminder of the fact that back, for those of us a little bit older, do you remember Jimmy Swaggart, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, even later Ted Haggard? Well, anyway, Jerry Falwell got involved in that as well. I'm not going to say much more about it. You can read it for yourself. You can look at some of those pictures. And nevertheless, I think we can honestly say that Jerry Falwell is no longer the president of Liberty University, but that could change by the end of this hour. So anyway, we're going to come back and talk about something very significant, though, Karl Marx, and the impact this one individual has had on all of civilization. I mean, you think of the number of lives that have been lost due to Marxism and communism, the influence of Marxism today. So Dr. Paul Kengor is going to take us through an understanding of Karl Marx and the legacy that he has left behind. We'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/sign up. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and a little bit later we're going to be talking with Professor Paul Kengor about his book, The Devil Karl Marx. We're going to talk about Karl Marx, Marxism, communism, bringing it all the way up to the Frankfurt School and a variety of other things that I think you will really appreciate. But of course, last night was the first night of the Republican National Convention, and there was sort of an attempt to focus on a number of different themes. Some of the very significant aspects of it came from lesser-known people, like the individual Natalie Harp, who was actually wanting to talk about the value of the right to try experimental medicine, which apparently saved her life. Somebody I'm going to talk about in just a minute, Vernon Jones, who is a Democratic state representative in Georgia. Some of our people in Georgia might know him, but most of us have never heard of him before, but a Democrat, African-American, who wanted to focus on that as well. Andrew Pollock, father of a young daughter that was killed during Parkland, but instead of blaming NRA, obviously puts the blame on the scumbag gunman that he talked about, and a number of others. But again, the theme in large part was to talk about the Republican Party as not racist and to be very inclusive. One of those people speaking, which I thought was very powerfully done, was Herschel Walker, who we know from football, but nevertheless took the time to talk about his own personal experiences with Donald Trump. Because if you're not familiar, Donald Trump actually was the owner of the United States Football League, New Jersey Generals, and he was the owner of that. That's how they got to know each other pretty well. Of course, they also got to know each other on a trip to Disney World, and he said he's really known him for 37 years, and talked about the fact that after he bought the team, Donald Trump tried to learn the history of the team, the players, the coaches, every detail. But he also was really struck by the fact that he watched Donald Trump treat janitors, security guards, and waiters the same way he would treat a VIP. Herschel Walker said he made them feel special because he knew that they were. Then he goes into the testimony that he had about this. He said, "It hurt my soul to hear the terrible names that people called Donald." Herschel Walker said, "The worst one is racist." And he says, "I take it personal and a personal insult that people would think that I've had a 37-year friendship with a racist. People that think that don't know what they're talking about," he said. "Growing up in the Deep South, I've seen racism up close. I know what it is, and it isn't Donald Trump." So anyway, Herschel Walker, quite a speech. Didn't expect it. Fairly short, and you can go out on YouTube and watch it. C-SPAN has posted it, and it's there. Another person I just mentioned a minute ago, I'd love to hear from some of you in Georgia. Maybe you know the state representative there, Vernon Jones, better than I do, African-American Democrat, who said, "As you can see, I'm a man of color. And I'm a lifelong Democrat, too. Democratic Party does not want black people to leave their mental plantation," he said. And then spent some time talking about some of the things that Donald Trump has done to help African Americans. And I'll just mention a few before we take a break. The guaranteeing the funding for the historically black colleges and university called HBCUs for 10 years. He said that's something that has never happened before in our history. Also talked about the fact that President Trump champions school choice. And Vernon Jones said to ensure that no child, no matter their race or zip code, is left behind. Then he went on to say that the president was able to build the most inclusive economy ever with record low unemployment for African Americans. Vernon Jones also mentioned the opportunity zones that have been part of the Texas tax cut bill and were promoted earlier by Scott Turner and some others. And then also, Vernon Jones talked about the criminal justice reform that was passed under the Trump administration, which at least Vernon Jones said was necessary because some of the policies that were implemented by Joe Biden. And I'll get into what that meant in just a minute, because some of that goes back to something that Tim Scott talked about. But another person that was there to really kind of highlight the evening was Nikki Haley from South Carolina, who was the governor there and also then, of course, has been UN ambassador. And she said, "America is not a racist country. This is personal for me. I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrants. My father wore a turban. My mother wore a sari. I was a brown girl in a black and white world. It was difficult, but my parents never gave in to grievance and hate." And she said, "I grew up to become the first minority and first female governor of South Carolina." And then spent some time really criticizing this idea of at least the Democratic National Convention last week, turning a blind eye towards riots and rage, as she put it. He says, "Of course we value and respect every black life. Black cops who have been shot in the line of duty, they matter. The black small business owners who watch their life's work go up in flames, they matter. The black kids that have been gunned down in the playground, their lives matter, and their lives are being ruined and stolen by the violence in our streets." And then she concluded by talking about the real contrast between the reaction to George Floyd's death and the riots and what happened in Charleston in that church, that shooting. If you're not familiar with this, as an individual that actually went into the church, sat there for a while, listened to it, then kills so many individuals. And she said, quote, "Our state came face to face with evil. After the horrific event, we didn't turn against each other. We came together, black and white, Democrat and Republican. Together, we made the hard choices needed to heal and remove a divisive symbol peacefully and respectfully." So a lot of that took place there. And just before we take a break, let me talk about one more person from South Carolina, and that was Tim Scott. I thought he would actually have started the conversation, but actually he gave the keynote address. And in some respects, one of the more powerful stories that he told was of his grandfather, who actually left grade school, I guess at about the third grade, to pick cotton and never learned to read and write, but nevertheless saw his grandson become the first African American to be elected to both the United States House and Senate. And a line that I think was one of the most memorable of the evening was, "Our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime." Pretty powerful story, and if nothing else, a story from Tim Scott. Also then took on some of the things that Joe Biden had to say. He said Joe Biden said that if a black man didn't vote for him, he wasn't truly black. Then Scott also noted Joe Biden said black people are a monolithic community, and it was Joe Biden who said poor kids can be just as smart as white kids, and kind of took some of that on as well. And then points out that back in 1994, Senator Biden actually led the charge on the crime bill that put millions of black Americans behind bars. And he said President Trump's criminal justice reform law actually fixed some of those disparities. And then also, like we just mentioned a minute ago, Vernon Jones mentioned the historically black colleges and universities. Trump signed into law historically high funding for that as well. He concluded by saying, "Make no mistake, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want a cultural revolution, a fundamentally different America. If we let them, they will turn our country into a socialist utopia, and history has taught us that path only leads to pain and misery, especially for hardworking people hoping to rise." So just a brief and a very brief summary of some of the things that happened last night at the Republican convention. Let me encourage you to go to our website. You're going to see a piece that we've posted here by Paul Kengor on why not cancel Karl Marx. It's just part of the bigger book, The Devil and Karl Marx, and we'll talk with him about Marx and Marxism right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One striking difference between Europe and America has been the temptation many European countries to fall into totalitarianism. Dennis Prager reminds us that after World War I, many of these countries embraced communism, fascism, or Nazism, and there's a very good reason why. The primary beliefs that give rise to meaning in life were patriotism and the Judeo-Christian religion. The senseless slaughter during the Great War, as it was called, challenged both of these foundations. National identity was seen as the cause of the war, and religion was deemed unnecessary and perhaps a relic of the past. This void was left filled with communism in Russia, fascism in Italy, and Nazism in Germany. In the U.S., there were communists and many other activists promoting their totalitarian temptations, but they never took root. Americans did not lose their faith in religion, especially in Christianity. Patriotism not only flourished, but Dennis Prager reminds us that the words "under God" were even inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance recited daily in American schools. But the baby boomers born after World War II began to challenge God and country. These students were indoctrinated into secularism and anti-Americanism. The generations that followed them grew up in a country that was less religious and more likely to criticize America's government and history. Today we have a void that is similar to the one found in Europe a century ago. Most likely the totalitarian temptation today will be a leftist totalitarianism that promotes leftist political correctness and bans free speech and religion. There are many reasons to pray for a spiritual revival, but one of the more important reasons is to prevent this country from falling for the totalitarian temptation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
The rest of the hour, we're going to spend our time talking about Karl Marx and the legacy of Marxism. I think you're going to appreciate this conversation as we talk about this new book, The Devil and Karl Marx, just came out. And if you look for it in your local bookstore, you'll probably be able to find it. It's also available in hardback and Kindle. We have links on that on our website. And really, to understand some of these issues, we are always so grateful for Professor Paul Kengor, who is Professor of Political Science at Grove City College, also one of the chief academic fellows at the college's Institute for Faith and Freedom. In the past, we've talked about his book, which I would recommend, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Communism. Also, Dupes, How America's Adversaries Have Been Manipulated Progressives for a Century. But this book, The Devil and Karl Marx, is information we have on the website. And my first article that I've posted is also written by him because it appeared in the American Spectator. Why not cancel Karl Marx? Paul Kengor, always great to have you on the program.
Kerby, it's always great to be with you. Thanks.
Let's talk about the article for just a second, because, of course, as I was reading through the book, all of it is in the article from the book. But
right.
Let's talk about the irony that everything is getting torn down, and we're told by professors, maybe not you, but other professors, that we got to get rid of these dead white Europeans. Karl Marx fits into that category. We got to get rid of anybody that's a bigot, and his attitude towards blacks, Jews, and women off the charts. And yet, because he's a leftist, I guess we never hear anybody wanting to tear down a bust of Karl Marx, do we?
Well, that's right, Kerby. I mean, you will not find in the past of Winston Churchill, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, any of the people that are being targeted by the cancel culture today. They're tearing down their statues. You won't find any remarks in the history of those guys, anything like what Karl Marx said about blacks and Jews alone. I mean, it's really chilling stuff. And this idea, I mean, you like me, we go back far enough that we remember the acronym DWEMS, right? Dead White European Male.
Yes.
Right? That appeared on college campuses, I think, first in the late 1980s when I was there. And, one dead white European male that seems to get a pass is Karl Marx.
Yes.
Along with Engels, right? Along with pretty much the entire Frankfurt School, Sigmund Freud, Herbert Marcuse, Wilhelm Reich. They're all cool, right? But Karl Marx's statements among blacks and blacks and Jews alone. I don't know. Can we even say some of these things over the air? I mean,
really
some
can.
really offensive stuff. Yeah,
I know. And again, I want people to read this, but don't say them out loud because you will get yourself in trouble for sure. Yeah. And I love how you end it. Why aren't angry mobs staging sit-ins outside of professors' doors, insisting busts of Marx be tossed into the ash heap of history? Why do universities celebrate this man? Where's Black Lives Matter? We'll get to that a little bit later on this and all the rest. Yeah. And of course, when we were talking about what's in Seattle, my producer and a number of others reminded us that we have this statue of Vladimir Lenin right there in Seattle. So, I mean, some of these individuals do not get torn down, but it brings us to the bigger issue and really the title of your book. And when I saw the devil, I thought, well, yes, he is kind of a devilish person, but there is a sense in which the people that were around Karl Marx were frightened really by his almost demonic fits of rage, his babblings about violence. His father even said he was governed by a demon. So when he sometimes talks about the devil, you in the book sometimes say, well, maybe it was just a rhetorical flourish, but I'm not so sure. What's your thoughts?
Right, yeah. In fact, Engels called him the monster of 10,000 devils, and his wife called him wicked knave. Right, so you had all these different people, contemporaries, associates, fellow philosophers, academics, journalists. I give this chilling anecdote from Karl Heinzen, who described Marx as this like beady-eyed goblin who seemed like he was possessed. And you can actually find that in some of the earlier writings of some of the different Marx biographers, especially Robert Paine from 1968. Who probably wrote to this day the best biography of Marx that's ever been done. And Robert Paine was no right winger. I mean, this was a British academic, a man of letters, of the arts. He was a translator. He was a literary scholar. He wrote about poetry. He wrote about plays. And he even said that it did seem at times as if Marx was possessed by demons, and that he seemed to have the devil's malignity, as Robert Paine put it. Now, to be clear, and by the way, some people old enough listening to this show will remember the pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who wrote the amazing book Tortured for Christ, right? It was literally tortured for 14 years by communists in a Romanian prison. By the way, some of those Romanian prisons, like the one at Pitești, they were engaging in black masses. They were consecrating communion wafers in the form of human feces. And forcing priests to service other people. I mean, really devilish, demonic stuff. And Wurmbrand even said, he said that some of the worst scenes of Dante's Inferno can't compare to what he witnessed in communist prisons. And he even said some of the stuff that went on in Pitești is so vulgar and profane that he can't even put it into words.
Wow.
But we now have that stuff. That stuff is now declassified. We have that information, so we know what he was talking about. But Wurmbrand wrote a book called Marx and Satan, and Wurmbrand, like Paine, he says it seems like the man might very well have been possessed. Now, to be clear, Kerby, that's to borrow from Barack Obama. That's above my pay grade, right? To say whether or not Marx was possessed. But the man, people describe him in the ways that we're talking about, and I think most striking of all, the man wrote about the devil. Yeah. And he wrote plays and poetry. I opened the book.
Yeah, you got that poet. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. This is The Pale Maiden by Marx, 1837. And this one I think is the most telling because I think this one is really arguably autobiographical for Marx. Thus heaven I forfeited. I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. And Marx, whose soul was once true to God, he had become a Christian like his father did. They were Jewish, they converted, and then he really chose the dark side, not just atheism, but I would say, and this wasn't your garden variety atheism. I mean, this was really rebelling against God. And as Mikhail Bakunin and Saul Alinsky and some of the others, they characterize Satan as the first rebel, right? They have this like positive view of Satan as the first rebel. This was really chilling stuff that goes way beyond a sort of everyday atheism.
One of the things that I've done in the past is taken people through the piece that by Paul Johnson called The Intellectuals. It talks about Marx and Tolstoy and people like that. And he, of course, refers to Marx as the poet, the journalist, and the moralist. But just before we take a break, and we only got about 2 minutes for the break, and then we'll come back and get into it more, whether you look at Karl Marx or many of these other individuals, whether it's Feuerbach or whether it's Tolstoy or whether it is Rousseau, a lot of these individuals, they were just not good people to be around, and yet today we put them up on a pedestal, but they were miscreants and they were very dangerous, really kind of scary people, and certainly not responsible for their families at all.
Well, that's right, and we could talk at length about this. Marx, two of Marx's daughters committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands. Now, we all have had with our family members tragedies, difficult situations with kids, but I'll tell you, Kerby, I don't know of any other figure in all of history that I've ever met or encountered or even read about in newspapers who's had two daughters who killed themselves in suicide pacts with their husbands. I mean, that is unusual. That's really, and Marx wrote about suicide pacts with the devil in his poetry. So that's more than ironic. And one of the daughters, the son-in-law, Paul Lafargue, he was partly Cuban, and because of that, Marx, who was a racist, said, "Well, that means he's partly Negro."
Yes.
And so Marx called him Negrillo, or the gorilla. Yeah, very, very racist view.
It is almost impossible to even use some of his phrases without somebody turning us into the FCC. So we'll keep it as clean as we can, but we need to take one of those breaks. But I want to come back and get to something that is certainly a theme that runs through the book, and that is why such an antipathy by Marxists and Marx himself against religion, the opiate of the people, and why were so many churches persecuted, why indeed did those churches and Christians face so much persecution, and then we'll get into even the impact that it has today. The Frankfurt School, Black Lives Matter, a couple of other issues. Just an incredible book just came out, The Devil and Karl Marx. Paul Kengor with us. And by the way, the foreword by Michael Knowles, who we need to get on the program with us soon, and we will take a break and be back with more right after this.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Focusing on Karl Marx and Marxism, and if you've ever looked at the Black Book of Communism, which breaks down the facts, probably in the 20th century, about 100 million deaths. And Karl Marx wrote that when our turn comes, we shall make no excuses for the terror. There is only one way in which the murderous death agonies of the old society and the bloody birth throes of the new society can be shortened, simplified, and concentrated, and that way is revolutionary terror. And so, as you point out in this book, 20 million deaths in Russia, 65 million deaths in China, 1 million deaths in Vietnam, 2 million in North Korea, 2 million in Cambodia. The list goes on and on and on. And Paul Kengor, if nothing else, we have seen the incredible devastation left by one man, Karl Marx.
Well, that's right, Kerby, and I'm glad you zeroed in on that quote. That's exactly right. I mean, that very phrase, revolutionary terror, and he also stated that socialism cannot be brought into existence without revolution. And the Trotskyists, and I bring the Trotskyists into this because that's what Bernie Sanders was. And the Trotskyists, they believe in what they call permanent revolution. So you never give up the cause, you never give up the fight. And for people listening who think, oh, really, come on, Kengor was Bernie was he's kind of a happy old socialist, right? Well, he was a member. He supported. In fact, he was in 1980. He was an actual formal elector to the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party. So in the 1980 presidential election, when most normal Americans were trying to decide between Carter or Reagan, Bernie Sanders, who for the record was never actually a Democrat, really until he pursued the Democratic Party presidential nomination in 2016. That's, by the way, this is something that James Carville kept saying. He's like, Bernie's not a Democrat, right? You got to realize he's not a Democrat.
Yes.
He was, in 1980, he supported the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party. They believe in permanent revolution. So, and these revolutionaries, they believe that you get to revolution by tearing down the old order. Or to borrow from Marx, as he put it, you pursue the ruthless criticism of all that exists.
Well, let's, if we can, talk about the issue of religion, because as you pointed out, Marx's family was Jewish, both on his father's side, his mother's side. His father, though, because of pressure, decided to convert to Protestantism and basically Lutheranism. And so as a result, even though that was the case, you talk about the fact that also, and I think we still have Paul Kengor, that his father read Voltaire and Rousseau and a number to him. But if there's one thing that is true about Marxism, it does seem to be this antipathy, this very strong resistance to anything religion, especially Christianity. True?
Well, that's true. And also Marx's favorite was Goethe's Faust. And, that's the famous Faustian bargain, right, of selling one's soul. And Marx was fond of a line from Mephistopheles that, quote, everything that exists deserves to perish. I mean, think about that, Kerby. Mm-hmm. Everything that exists deserves to perish. And people said that Marx would walk around literally chanting from Goethe's Faust, literally chanting from Mephistopheles. I mean, that's, again, pretty chilling. And in his famous essay where he talks about religion as the opiate of the people, or as he puts it, the heart of heartless conditions, the soul of soulless conditions. He says in there, and I think this is a profoundly important statement, and if Marx got something right, it's this. He said the criticism of religion is the beginning of all criticism.
Wow.
The criticism of religion is the beginning of all criticism. And in that opiate of the masses essay, he used the word criticism 29 times. And in fact, Robert Payne and others have pointed out, other than the word criticize or criticism, and of course the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism today, that flies under the flag of what they call critical theory. The other word that he used all the time was abolition. Abolition of property, abolition of religion, even abolition of the family. And Marx and Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto, this is an exact quote, abolition of the family, exclamation mark, even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists, unquote. Paine says, and after Marx has abolished property, family, and nations and all existing societies, Marx then showed little interest in creating a new society on the ruins of the old. And in fact, in one of the poems that he wrote to his love, Jenny, his future wife, he said after he's comforted by her love, he would wander through the kingdom of ruins, his words glowing with action, his heart like the heart of God, and as Paine puts it, the Communist Manifesto was the gauntlet he threw at the world. So picture Marx kind of standing in the embers of the burnt-down building, the burnt-down house. And I think, Kerby, this applies so much to this kind of modern statue movement. I had a family member recently who said to me, I don't get it. They tore down Washington and Jefferson and Confederate generals, okay, but Union generals, Lincoln, and now Columbus, and now like St. Junipero Serra and what do they want to replace it with? And the answer really is they don't necessarily know. They just want to tear it down.
Nothing. Yeah. And when you use the word abolition, I wrote a commentary, came out last month, because most people know the idea of abolition of private property, but it was the abolition of the family, abolition of individuality, the abolition of nations, obviously the abolition of eternal truths, and, and abolition of any kind of class distinctions. You can make a very long list. I ran out of time before I ran out of things that Karl Marx wanted to abolish. And that, I think, explains exactly what we are talking about here, just the tearing down of society, and really no necessarily teleos or end point as to what that is going to look like, because he assumed that once you get rid of this bourgeois culture, once you get rid of capitalism, once you eventually are able to have the freeing up of this new man, then everybody will produce according to their ability, and then everybody will be able to receive according to their needs, and all sorts of greed and avarice and ambition will just simply fade away. And that was a utopian vision that he had, but he certainly had no idea of how that would actually take place.
Well, that's right. And he and Engels wrote in the Communist Manifesto, they said the entire communist theory may be summed up in this single sentence: abolition of private property. And I've argued with different socialists and Marxists over the years. And one of them, Francis Wien, who's one of the kind of top biographers of Marx, who's a pure apologist for Marx, and he said it's absurd to blame Marx for the gulags in the Soviet Union. To which I would say, really? I mean, if you want to abolish everybody's private property, you don't think you're going to have to jail people? You don't think you're going to need guns and gulags to take away people's property? I mean, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal. It's a natural right. It's a biblical right. I mean, people have the right to property. In the 10 points in the Communist Manifesto, first one is abolition of property and land. The third point is abolition of all right of inheritance. My favorite, this is point 9, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of people across the land. So they wanted to redistribute people, Kerby, not just their property, but people.
Yes.
So this is a truly, I heard your commentary during the previous segment, the totalitarian temptation. This is really totalitarianism. This is a complete transformation of human nature. Marx is no economist. I mean, he's a philosopher here. he is. You just don't get any more radical than this vision for the world.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, just maybe a few application points. You have a whole section on the Frankfurt School, so I wanted you to maybe bring it up to what is being taught today in the schools and the universities. And then if we have some time, I suspect you have a few comments about Black Lives Matter, since indeed two of the founders of Black Lives Matter movement call themselves Marxist and are calling themselves trained Marxists, and are individuals that want to basically abolish the nuclear family. So that sounds like Marxism. So we'll get into some of the specifics of this as well. This book will give you a tremendous amount of history of Karl Marx through history as well, and how that has played itself out in various aspects of our history. But it also brings you to some of the things we're dealing with even today in the university environment. We've talked, of course, with Paul Kengor in the past about cultural Marxism and a number of others. So we'll try to get into that briefly before we run out of time. But if you are interested, the book is just out, The Devil and Karl Marx. We have information about it in case you'd like to order it in hardback or Kindle. And we'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View your listener-supported source for truth.
Professor Paul Kengor with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about his book, The Devil and Karl Marx. Eric Metaxas will be with us at the top of the hour. And I just thought I might focus on one of your last chapters on the Frankfurt School, but also that gets us into something we've talked about with you before, cultural Marxism, critical theory, and even Saul Alinsky. So in some respects, Karl Marx really thought that there would be an economic revolution, really never took place. And in some respects, because of that transformation, now Marxism is seen as a cultural issue. And this is why, as you have pointed out in the past, feminists, homosexuals, and others sometimes see kindred spirit with Marxists in ways that I think Karl Marx never would have anticipated.
Well, that's exactly right, Kerby. And in fact, it's interesting. If you go to the website now of Communist Party USA, and also its main publication, People's World, and People's World is the successor publication to the Daily Worker, and it actually says now at the masthead of it that People's World offers a daily news platform for a broad labor-led people's movement, and there it lists not just workers, unemployed, but people of color, immigrants, women, youth, senior, I'm quoting from it right now, LGBTQ people, and get this, cultural workers, right? Cultural workers. And think about that. In the old days, Marxists were looking to the factory floor, right? They were looking for steel workers, coal miners, farmers. Later on, Bella Dodd in the state of New York in the 1930s, organized teachers, right? But now they're looking for what they call cultural workers. So they are really all in for the cultural revolution, which for them is about sex, gender, marriage, all these different hot button issues. And it really shouldn't surprise people. It's funny, you talk about this stuff now, and people on the left get all bent out of shape, right? Oh, what are you doing? You're calling. It's where they are, and people like Wilhelm Reich, who was one of the key founders of the Frankfurt School in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s, he literally coined the term and wrote the book, The Sexual Revolution. And I've got a chapter in here on Wilhelm Reich, who's talking about genital stimulation of infants, Kirby, of infants of all things. I mean, he's not even. He says enough disturbed stuff about 4-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 12 infants of all things, and he was trying to fuse a school of Freudianism and Marxism to create this Freudian Marxism. He and Marcuse and these other guys, they would be picked up by the neo-Marxists. Kate Millett, who wrote Sexual Politics in 1968 at Columbia University. For these people, these Marxists, they are far more interested. If you go to the Women in Washington, D.C. in January 2017, all those young girls in that sea of pink hats, and one of the co-sponsors and speakers is Angela Davis, of all people, who ran on the Communist Party USA presidential ticket, the Veep, in 76 and 1980, student of Herbert Marcuse. She's not quoting Marx and Engels. She's talking about LGBTQ rights. She's talking about flora, fauna, and Chelsea Manning. So they're fighting on the cultural front. That's where their battle is today. To an extent, they've given up the economic battle, and instead they're looking to fundamentally transform the United States in the area of culture, which for them, again, means sexuality, marriage, gender, and issues like that.
What about the issue of race? Black Lives Matter movement, and I want to make a distinction because people always misunderstand that. Black Lives Matter, true. Black Lives Matter movement started by two individuals that call themselves trained Marxist. What about that?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Patrice Cullors, it's spelled Cullors. And you can find this online. It's probably had 1 million clicks on YouTube, but it's an interview she did not that long ago, and she says, myself and Alicia, so that would be Alicia Garza, who's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter.
Right.
she says, we are trained Marxists. She said, we are super versed in ideological theories. She said, that's our ideological framework. And if you just go to the Black Lives Matter website, which, people, you should do that and read about an organization before you put the organization's name on the side of your stadium. All right? Yeah, I'm thinking of Fenway Park, PNC. I mean, literally, before you put the name on the side of your stadium, go read the website, all right? And in the About section, it says, among other things, that they are about taking down the quote, Western prescribed nuclear family structure, unquote.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What does that have to do with George Floyd?
Yeah.
Answer, nothing.
Yes.
Nothing. Right? That's part of the cultural, sexual goal that they have. By the way, in that About section, they have words like queer, heteronormative, transphobia, and they even use the word comrades twice. So they were doing that long before anything happened to George Floyd. And I tell people all the time, if you want to reform the police, right, or you're against police violence against people of color, as of course all of us are, write a check to the NAACP or somebody like that. You don't have to join Black Lives Matter. But groups like BLM, Patrisse Cullors, and Alicia Garza, they realize, as groups like the Communist Party did with the Scottsboro Boys in the 1930s, it's really smart to grab an issue like a racial tragedy that everybody agrees upon was a tragedy and seize that and use that as kind of like an issue to attract a much larger number of people to your group and to your cause. Communists have been doing that for literally 100 years.
Well, again, we're just about out of time. Let me just mention that we have a link to your website. And if you've ever been thinking about going to college, one of those great opportunities would be to go to Grove City College, which I would highly recommend. Also, we have information about the book, The Devil and Karl Marx, Communism's Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. And you can get it both in hardback and Kindle. And always, we appreciate the good work that you do. And Paul, we've also posted the piece from the American Spectator, where I know you write for him as well. Why not cancel Karl Marx? Yeah, I think that's a good start. I might want to get rid of a few other statues there as well, maybe the founder of Planned Parenthood and a few others to come to mind, but nevertheless, those are people that get a pass. So, as always, thank you so very much for joining us today on Point of View, and thank you for taking the time to write a 450-page book.
Well, thank you, Kirby. I got to tell you, it was not fun. This isn't the kind of thing you want to sit around and read at night. It's pretty depressing, but I guess it's the occupational hazard that I have to deal with, and I love doing your show. Please call me anytime.
Well, again, let me also commend to our listeners the Politically Incorrect Guide to Communism. Very readable and a lot of fun. Paul Kengor wrote that one as well. We need to take a break. Eric Metaxas will be with us. We're going to have a little bit of fun with, the Donald series. Donald drains the swamp. Donald builds the wall. Donald challenges fake news. But I suspect he'll have a few comments as well about, first, the Democratic National Convention last week and the Republican Convention that is this week. So we have a chance to chat with him, and then of course an open line at the end to get into a couple more issues that I have left to discuss. And you can find all the information related to some of the conversations we're going to have certainly on the website pointofview.net. We have certainly some things about security, public education, social control, a number of other commentaries that you would like to read, but we need to take a break. We'll continue our conversation, in this case with Eric Metaxas, right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Last hour we spent some time, first of all, talking about day one in the Republican National Convention. Had a chance to talk a little bit about Senator Tim Scott and Nikki Haley and Herschel Walker and the numbers. And then we, of course, spent some time talking with Paul Kengor about the book, The Devil Karl Marx. This hour we're going to have a chance to talk to our good friend Eric Metaxas about his new book, and maybe he's got a few comments about the Republican National Convention. Then we'll get into one of the big issues in this election, security, and how that surfaces in so many different ways. Before we're done, we'll also talk about the decision to provide this plasma to individuals that have been struck by COVID-19 and what that might mean and how that has been changed because of some decisions at the FDA, also due to some of the actions by President Donald Trump. Eric Metaxas, of course, a very good friend, has been on this program many times before, author of such books as Amazing Grace, Bonhoeffer, Miracles, Martin Luther, If You Can Keep It. Of course, as a talk show host himself, and some of his humor books have been Donald Drains the Swamp, Donald Builds the Wall, and the latest one I have in front of me, Donald and the Fake News. Eric Metaxas, how you doing, guy?
I'm doing great. Today is launch day for the book, so Kerby, I appreciate you having me on to talk about it.
Well, let's talk about it for a few minutes, and I'll get some comments about the Republican National Convention and the interaction you've had with President Donald Trump. But the fake news, anybody who's not familiar, you're talking about Donald, who is the caveman, and this one, he goes into the cave, and he goes and begins to speak, and some people that look vaguely familiar, like Nancy Pelosi and a few other individuals, as well as people in the, quote, media in the cave world are attacking him and criticizing him for just making common sense statements. And so he spends some time trying to explain that to them. And it's another one of those fun books. And you and Tim Ragland have done a good job of capturing some of the humor.
It's meant to be humor for adults, and any adult looking at it. I mean, you know, there's a guy who looks like Adam Schiff. He's supposed to represent Adam Schiff. In case anybody wants to know, there's a guy looks like Jerry Nadler. He's supposed to represent Jerry Nadler. It's very goofy, but it's also a parable. You know, when you try to understand what is happening in our country, I think you have to make fun of the other side to keep sane, because it's so crazy. So the first book, Donald Drains the Swamp, is kind of basic about explaining how do we govern ourselves, and what is the swamp? Why is the swamp, you know, governed by money and access, and, you know, the people can't get access to their leaders and stuff? And in the second book, we deal with the wall, and it's meant, as I say, to be a humor book for adults. It's political humor, but it's in the shape of a kid's book. In other words, it can work as a kid's book because there's nothing nasty in it. But this one, I have to say, I like it the best of the three, because I think it's the funniest. That when you're dealing with fake news and the madness of the left, I mean, the Trump derangement syndrome. So in this episode, Donald and the Fake News, you have the resistance. You know, they're not happy with the freedom and the self-government because they don't have these swampy privileges they used to have. And so they gather in a cave with a kind of sorceress who looks a little bit like a speaker from San Francisco. I can't mention names, but it rhymes with Pelosi. And I should say that the character is named Madam Miss Speaker, and she's kind of trying to gather the resistance to plot and scheme how do we get our power back? And so there's a big Russian salad dressing hoax that they try to put over on the people, and that fails. And then there is something like an impeachment, but eventually they just decide that they're just going to have to launch as much fake news, which of course we know is non-true facts, which some people call lies. They're going to have to just do that, a barrage. It's the only way to go, to be relentlessly negative. And we can guess how that goes. But there's a lot of humor that adults will get. But as I say, it's fun. It's meant to be fun. It's not meant to be nasty. But I think that our side needs more humor. We need to be able to make fun of what we see happening at the same time that we take it seriously, because you know that I take it very seriously.
And I love just all the pictures. One locks him up, LOX, ham on lies, Donald full of baloney.
It's a lot of that kind of that old corny humor. Yeah, Donald goes into a deli. Somebody spots him. Somebody who's supposed to be Bernie, comrade something. I can't remember what his name is, but he spots him going into a deli, and he orders a Reuben sandwich, and basically the character, the Bernie character, tells everybody he ordered a Reuben sandwich. He says, sauerkraut, corned beef, and Russian dressing. And they say, Russian dressing, wait a minute.
Yeah, Russian dressing.
Russian dressing. And so they make a big thing out of it, and they try to persuade people that he's in the bag for the Russian dressing company, that he's really just trying to get rich off the Russian dressing company, and that he's their puppet. So it has a lot of parallels, but they make about as much sense as the reality. I mean, the idea that he was working for Russia, how do you not laugh? I mean, you groan, and then you have to laugh. It's like they pushed this for 3 years. So I'm just glad that we got through that.
Speaking of Russia, real quickly, just before we take a break, then we'll get some of your comments on some other things. There is one statue in the book, and it's a statue of a Russian by the name of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which you give a very good quote there. So some people that maybe have never heard of him or are unaware of the issue of liberty, I thought that was another very great insert, and maybe a statute that should not be pulled down, right?
Oh, my goodness. In my most recent non-humorous book, it's called Seven More Men, I talk about Solzhenitsyn. Right. He's one of the great heroes of the West, one of the great heroes of freedom, anti-communist. And so I just thought it appropriate that we put him in the middle of the book, because there's people all over the world fighting for freedom, and here we are tearing down statues and taking it for granted. So, yeah, I take this seriously.
Well, and again, I remember you saying at the time that Hugh Hewitt was actually in the rain when Solzhenitsyn was speaking. I remember that from the last time we did the interview. But
that's right.
Let's take a break. And again, the book is out today. The publication date is August 25th, 2020, Donald and the Fake News, Donald the Caveman, and it's another one of those great series in the humor books. Donald drains the swamp, Donald builds the wall. But I thought before we go, maybe we'd get a few comments from Eric Metaxas about the Democratic National Convention last week, what he has already seen tonight, last night, and what might be coming in the future on the Republican National Convention, and then maybe some thoughts about Donald Trump and some of the reaction that people have towards him. So let's take a break. When we come back, if you'd like to join the conversation, he'll be with us a little bit longer. Then we'll have an open line, and we'll get into some of the other topics we have posted on the news and a number of columns. But again, if you find yourself saying you'd like to know more about the Devil and Karl Marx or the book Donald and the Fake News, obviously you can find any of those books in your local bookstore, but we've got a link so that you can get them both in hardcover and Kindle. That's our service to you, so that you have access to those. And I think you really will enjoy that. And I would have to agree, of the three books in the Donald series, this one maybe is the most humorous. It is kind of heart-rending to see this woman that looks like Nancy Pelosi tearing up the Constitution, but I guess I've seen her tear up some other pages, so I shouldn't be surprised. Let's take a break. We'll continue our comments and commentary from Eric Metaxas right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
One striking difference between Europe and America has been the temptation many European countries to fall into totalitarianism. Dennis Prager reminds us that after World War I, many of these countries embraced communism, fascism, or Nazism, and there's a very good reason why. The primary beliefs that give rise to meaning in life were patriotism and the Judeo-Christian religion. The senseless slaughter during the Great War, as it was called, challenged both of these foundations. National identity was seen as the cause of the war, and religion was deemed unnecessary and perhaps a relic of the past. This void was left filled with communism in Russia, fascism in Italy, and Nazism in Germany. In the U.S., there were communists and many other activists promoting their totalitarian temptations, but they never took root. Americans did not lose their faith in religion, especially in Christianity. Patriotism not only flourished, but Dennis Prager reminds us that the words "under God" were even inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance recited daily in American schools. But the baby boomers born after World War II began to challenge God and country. These students were indoctrinated into secularism and anti-Americanism. The generations that followed them grew up in a country that was less religious and more likely to criticize America's government and history. Today we have a void that is similar to the one found in Europe a century ago. Most likely the totalitarian temptation today will be a leftist totalitarianism that promotes leftist political correctness and bans free speech and religion. There are many reasons to pray for a spiritual revival, but one of the more important reasons is to prevent this country from falling for the totalitarian temptation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Eric Metaxas with us for a few more minutes. And again, let me just mention the book, Donald and the Fake News. But also, we mentioned in passing 7 men, 7 more men, 7 women. I guess we're going to have 7 more women. We'll have all these series of books that are available. And we do have a link to Eric Metaxas' website. You can find that at our website, pointofview.net. And Eric, let me maybe ask you a little bit, first of all, of last week. We had 4 days of the Democratic National Convention. Those of us as talk show hosts have to watch those, and that is a public service we provide for many of our listeners that do not. Any thoughts from last week's Democratic National Convention?
Well, I honestly could not bear to watch most of it. I thought it was terrible. I mean, look, you know I'm going to say that anyway because I think their ideas are terrible. But what they said about the president, half of it was simply untrue. And I think if you have to actually make stuff up, you're in trouble. What I saw last night, the first night of the GOP convention, I thought to myself, this is the America we know. This is the America where people value the things that we've always valued. And I think we have such a stark choice, Kerby, this time that it's stunning. I hope everybody understands the importance of voting. This is not something we can take lightly. We are really seeing a divide that is it's a fork in the road. If this country does not stay on the right path, if we take the wrong path at this fork, it's over. Be dramatic, but I think that's it's simply the case that we have a choice between the America of the founders of self-government and freedom. And then we've got, on the other hand, a culturally Marxist-leaning radical left. We've never seen anything this radical, and the Democrats in power don't seem to have the slightest bit of courage or principle to stand against it. They could be doing that right now and scoring big points with the American people. They've done just the opposite.
Let's talk about that for just a minute because, you know, since I'm the old guy around the table, I remember when George Wallace said there's not a dime's worth of difference between Republicans and Democrats, and that's why he actually ran. But there is such a difference, and it's a striking difference even in 4 years, because we just posted on our website the 2020 Democratic platform and encourage people, if they'd like to look at it, read it, or we've done commentaries on it. We'll do the same for the Republican platform. But I'd have to say the Republican platform that I've looked at, the draft, isn't really that much different than 2000 or 2008. But the difference between the Democratic platform in 2020 and 2016 or 2020 and 2008 is remarkable. Really? And in some respects, just think about in 2008 when Barack Obama was running, he said, you know, I think marriage is between one man and one woman. We weren't talking about transgenderism. We weren't talking about a Green New Deal. We weren't talking about Medicare for all. You can keep the list going for as long as you want, but you know that this is perhaps the most radical platform, and people that look at Joe Biden as being kind of a moderate fail to understand that he's really not going to be running the show, is he?
Well, see, this is what's stunning to me is that, you know, you've got two issues. One is a candidate who obviously, I mean, when you compare him to Trump, it becomes absurd, but on any level doesn't seem ready to govern. He seems like somebody who has really slipped past his prime kind of dramatically in the last couple of years, and he is not ready for the job. Now, that's not even getting into the fact that he is going to be, you know, the front man for a left that has bowed the knee to the most radical elements that we've ever seen. Again, I say cultural Marxism because you have Black Lives Matter and Antifa. These are openly Marxist organizations. These are Marxist organizations that hate God, that hate anything associated with the America of the founders, that vision, and feel that we were founded on a racist basis, and we ought to tear the whole thing down and remake it in the image of, you know, whether it's Karl Marx or Fidel Castro. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That's an amazing thing that we're at that point in America. So the Democrat is not Jimmy Carter or Walter Mondale. It is somebody who's going to represent really radical forces that will not stand up to crazy ideas like defunding the police or having no borders or paying for illegal immigrants' health care or education or anything they want. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I think your average American, if they can be forced to pay a little attention to this, they would quickly see something is wrong. The party has gone way off the rails, and the choice is simple. If people can be troubled to understand what we have in front of us.
Well, and again, last night, Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, also UN ambassador, says America's not a racist country. And this is personal for me because I'm a proud daughter of an Indian immigrant. My father wore a turban, my mother a sari. I was a brown girl in a black and white world. It was difficult, but my parents never gave in to grievance or hate. And she said I grew up to be the first minority and first female governor. Or, you know, Senator Tim Scott, who you know, gives a speech last night about the fact that his grandfather had to drop out of grade school, never learned to read and write so that he could pick cotton. And our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime.
Amazing. Right? Absolutely amazing. I mean, that is the American dream. And anybody who tries to denigrate that, they don't understand the lives of real people. And I think a lot of the globalist elites, the people in the media, they're extremely out of touch, extremely out of touch.
One last question for you before I let you go, and that is a lot of people, including the president, and certainly I've done lots of commentaries on the danger of mail-in ballots. You know, we had 33 million mail-in ballots last time. They're talking about 80 million mail-in ballots. You live up in the Northeast. You saw a 12th congressional campaign and district and election that wasn't decided for months. They're going to do a mulligan, an electoral mulligan there for Paterson, New Jersey, because they had to throw out 25% of the ballots. So if I look at New York and New Jersey and extrapolate that to the country, I'm concerned. What about you?
This is a cynical way to steal an election that you cannot win fairly. I think that it's an idea that on two levels it fails. Number one is, practically speaking, it's a joke. I mean, it's like saying we're going to play, we're going to play water polo, but we're not going to have any water. You really cannot have an election in a country unless you do it in a way that is established, that works, because you undermine the whole system. People don't know, does my vote count? And when you have mail-in ballots, we know what's going to happen. They're going to be stolen. They're going to be, people are going to get ballots for grandma who died 5 years ago, and they're going to fill it out. And it's basically a way to destroy America, just in undermining the faith we have in our system of government, that it works, that it's fair, that my vote counts. That's number one. But number two, it's a tremendously cynical way of trying to win an election that you cannot win fairly. And I think that we have to stand against this. It's really so disastrous, so preposterous that they would propose it. But I think the desperation is pretty clear. People have to ask, why suddenly do they want to do this? I mean, really, is it about COVID? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, again, if people want to get more information, we have a link to ericmetaxas.com. We also have the information today about Donald and the fake news. And congratulations, another one of those Donald series. Donald drains the swamp, Donald builds the wall, and Donald and the fake news. And it came out today, and I appreciate you giving us some time here on Point of View.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Kerby.
Eric Metaxas. And again, you can find information about him. You can follow him on his radio program. And, of course, you can get any one or all of his books. And there are a lot of them on the website. So let's take a break. Last half hour, I want to give you an open line. So we're going to talk about a couple of issues. One of those is the second article I've posted. It's by Mark Lauter. Now, he works with the Trump campaign, so obviously he's got a bias towards Trump. But at the same time, I think he identifies something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Kelly Shackelford, and that is, in some of these surveys, the word safety or security is popping up there. Now, oftentimes when we have done surveys in the past and asked what is the number one issue, for oftentimes it is the economy. I'm sad to say, which shouldn't always be the case. We shouldn't just always vote our pocketbooks, but that's always near the top of the list. Some of these moral issues are as well, in terms of life and marriage and things like that. But safety is shown up, and so we're going to talk about that, and maybe we'll even talk about it with Kelly Shackelford on Friday. He has actually been invited by the president to watch his acceptance speech in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, so he'll watch the speech, fly out early Friday morning. Unless there's a problem with the airplane, he'll be in studio with us telling us a little bit of some of the behind the scenes with the president, and I think you'll find that helpful. Then we'll get into this whole idea of another therapy for people that have COVID-19, and that is plasma. So we'll talk about what that means. And so we have a lot more to cover, but if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those calls in just a minute. Wanted to talk about the issue of security, and then a little bit later this hour, half hour, if we have some time left, we'll talk about this idea of convalescent plasma, which seems to be another very effective treatment for COVID-19. The issue of security, the second article I've posted on the website from Mark Lauder. Again, as a disclaimer, it works, of course, as strategic communications with Donald Trump, so obviously he has a bias towards Donald Trump, but still I think what he is talking about here is key, because a while back we were talking with Kelly Shackelford and had seen some of these polls that were showing for the first time words like safety and security popping up. Now, as I've already pointed out before we went to the break, that oftentimes when you ask people what are the issues that are important to them, the economy is one of those. And back in 1992, you might remember James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid, and recognizing that that was indeed the case. And so this is one aspect of security. But Mark Lauder says security really is defined in a number of different ways: economic security, security for you and your family, and the national security. Economic security, how does that fit? Well, it does get back to the economy, but again, here's where you have some of the clear choices that even Eric Metaxas was talking about a minute ago. Joe Biden has been a supporter and pushed through NAFTA, has been supportive of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Those are the things that Donald Trump wanted to get rid of. If we indeed do have debates between the two individuals, they're going to come down on very different sides on those issues. Add to that things like the Green New Deal, tax increases, Medicare for all the other issues that we've talked about so often, and there is a concern about economic security. I suspect also maybe with that will surface somewhere along the line of the fact that we're spending much more than we're bringing in, and we've had record deficits under, of course, Donald Trump, in part brought about by the pandemic, but we'll see how that goes, and that will be an issue that will surface. So economic security also requires secondarily security at home, and that has been a striking difference, because last night, as I've already mentioned, even in the last hour, the Republican National Convention on a couple of occasions with some of the different speakers talked about the fact that the cities are burning, there are rioters, there are looters. Just a minute, I'll talk about what has been taking place in Kenosha, Wisconsin, since that shooting that took place on Sunday. But hardly anything mentioned by the Democrats, and it's going to be something I think is going to be featured all week at the Republican National Convention. And Mark Lauder points out that it's maybe not surprising that a lot of major police organizations have actually given their support to President Trump, because, as he says, they know that the men and women who run toward the danger, protect our loved ones and others, are the ones that keep our neighborhood safe. So first of all, economic security, if you will, domestic security, and then international security, because he says most of us also expect the president to protect our nation, our allies from threats abroad. And again, rebuilding the military has been something that President Trump has emphasized. Also wanting to disconnect from senseless wars. We may talk about that in the future. And then the taking out of certain terrorists like Iran's Qasem Soleimani, the ISIS leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and some others. So security, kind of a big issue in this election, wasn't always the case in other elections, and even leading to people going out in the streets to protect themselves or businesses. We yesterday mentioned what has been happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with the shooting of Jacob Blake, shot in the back as he opened a car door. And if you've seen the video, it's pretty awful. But then leading to all sorts of riots and looting and things like that. Well, there were a number of these armed residents that come out to protect these small businesses. when you recognize that, in a sense, the police are overwhelmed and they may not necessarily do anything to protect those businesses, you're starting to see almost sort of a vigilante spirit developing, saying, we will go out and do so. A number of those individuals who were armed yesterday, actually, when they were talking to reporters, said, we're not trying to protect the government. In fact, they said to some of the looters, you want to tear down those lampshades, go for it. I guess it's not my speed, but it's the government, and I'm cleaning up the words here, that messed you up. He said something a lot worse. It's not the civilians. These guys, meaning pointing to the businesses, didn't do anything to you, right? So we don't want to hurt these people. So you're starting to see some people say, we may just have to take policing into our own hands. I'm not saying that's positive. When you recognize that individuals that have been to a police academy and have been trained all their lives making mistakes, you can imagine the kind of mistakes that will happen when vigilante citizens go out there with their guns. But nevertheless, that is where this issue of security is showing up, not only in the streets, but in a lot of the polls, and how that affects the election will be very interesting. Let's go to some phone calls. First, we'll go to South Carolina on the Good News Network. Michael, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, good afternoon, Kerby. Thank you. And my thought is when we are describing all the chaos that's going on and start peeling the layers back to the source, it's, of course, our real enemy is the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. And sometimes that's hard to remember. And so I think one thing we can do when we're talking about security, we can, for personal security, we can practice prayer, and there's not anything we can do on our own, but prayer really taps into the power of Christ through the Holy Spirit, and we know that the Lord hears and answers prayer, and I will say that many of us, we don't always agree with point of view, but we pray for you on a regular and consistent basis. My wife and I, and we financially support you. So that was my first thought.
Well, thank you. And again, we certainly want to continue emphasizing prayer. We have a prayer email that goes out. Of course, we want a lot of people to participate in the September 26th call to prayer, call to return. But I think you have a second point, so let me let you continue.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And the second point was more practical. I started listening in when Mr. Metaxas was on. And my thought about that is the chaos that's going on. Maybe this is obvious. It really benefits the left, and I think it's in their interest to perpetuate it. And particularly with the coronavirus, if they insist on mail-in ballots, I think using coronavirus as an excuse, I think some pretty massive voter fraud is going to be perpetuated, and they will. I think they feel like the ends justify the means, and I don't think they'll hesitate to steal the election if they can. And that's something we can take it all the way back and say we can pray about that. So that was my thought.
Very good points. And I have just recently taped a little video clip that we're going to put into our flash drive, which we'll make available in the fall when we make available a flash drive for our Truth Team Week. But one of the things I talked about is I've been able to identify, and others have been able to identify, about 150 different lawsuits about election laws. So you can get the sense that if the election is close, those of us that are a little bit older, Michael, I suspect you are like I am, can remember 2000, which I love what Ari Fleischer said. He was press secretary for George W. Bush. I wouldn't wish that on George W. Bush or Al Gore. I wouldn't wish it on, of course, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And yet, given the possibility that you could move from 33 million mail-in ballots that we had last time, which in most cases were actually either mail-in ballots done in states that have been doing this for years and have worked out some of the kinks. State of Washington is a good example. It took a while to get that really working efficiently, or then absentee ballots, and you move from 33 million to 80 million, possibly. It is possible that we wouldn't even know on Tuesday night who wins. We would know that week. We might not know that month. There might be all sorts of ongoing lawsuits. It could be, like you said, chaos that you can't possibly imagine. So your point's well taken. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to talk real briefly while we talk about security. It's pretty clear now that the year 2020 will be the year of the gun. If you look at the FBI's National Instant Background Check System, it does seem to me that now, over the first 7 months of this year, there were over 12 million guns bought, up 70% over that, which likely includes at least 5 million or more first-time gun owners. So we'll talk about why that is the case. Also, what the defunding of the police seems to be doing and could possibly do in Seattle. And then we'll talk about this convalescent plasma, which seems to be a very effective treatment for COVID-19. So we still have some other things to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Again, one of the words that is coming out more and more in some of these surveys is security or safety, sometimes the same word. And it is illustrated by the fact that a lot of people that never thought they would own a gun, I guess, decided that they should. Now, I'm not advocating that you go out and buy a gun if you don't know how to use it. And if you do purchase one, make sure you get trained properly. And I don't think it's an either or. Some people say, well, I'll just pray, or I need to get a gun, whatever. I was thinking, in Nehemiah, what does Nehemiah do? Well, he prays, but then when they're building the wall, they also have a sword strapped to them, and if the trumpet sounds, they will pull out their sword. So they're building the wall, they're praying, and they also are defending themselves. So there is a sense in which, especially as we start seeing this chaos, and as it is unfolded in Kenosha, Wisconsin, of course, it's been going on for some time in Portland, Oregon, and Chicago and other places, a lot of people feel maybe they need a gun. Whether that is the case, I'll leave that to their individual decision, but nevertheless, it does seem that if nothing else, we are selling more guns in this year of 2020 than ever before, and that's given the fact that a lot of gun shops have not been able to keep up with the demand. If you like to go shooting, as I do sometimes, it's almost impossible to find 9mm ammunition right now. And the surge in gun ownership is driven by two issues, according to this article. One, of course, is the riots, where police have neither the resources nor the personnel to handle it. And so you're seeing some of the rioters accost individuals, innocent people, destroying property and all of the rest. And so that's one reason. The second has to do with this election season and the threat, it says in this article, of a Democrat taking over has made those who wish to own a gun believe that it's now or never. Now, Democrats haven't said a lot about gun control, but nevertheless, I think that's another reason why you're seeing this incredible surge in gun ownership. And a lot of that gets back to the fact that you keep hearing this phrase, defund the police. Well, again, politicians assure us we're not going to defund the police, but we're going to substantially reduce the number of police officers out there on the streets. So there's even less possibility there could be a confrontation between a law enforcement officer and somebody of a minority. But what would that do to the crime statistics? And this particular article by Joseph Sullivan looks at Seattle's intended reduction of 100 police officers and its expected side effects. Those of you watching online can see the article here, which actually, if nothing else, talks about the fact that there would be a remarkable increase in various kinds of crimes. No surprise there. What this particular article does is look at what happens when you reduce the number of officers in the Seattle police force due to layoffs or attrition by 100, and then takes the numbers from the Journal of Public Economics, a very good article that appeared about a year ago on how each officer affects in a positive or negative way crime. And then you multiply that by 100 and come to the conclusion that in Seattle there would be 10 additional murders, 53 additional rapes, 198 additional robberies. Now, the first thing you could push back on that is to say, well, yes, but those are national averages. Maybe that wouldn't apply to Seattle. Maybe. But it is taking a big risk in light of what we know around the country. And, of course, something else that's not in the article that occurred to me, in reducing the number of law enforcement officers, it also says it would reduce the number of traffic stops. If you don't want to get a ticket, maybe you feel good about that, but it means you're going to catch fewer speeders or people that drive recklessly, fewer drunk drivers, fewer distracted drivers that are always looking on their cell phone instead of looking on the road. That could make driving in Seattle more dangerous in addition to everything else we just mentioned. So something to think about. And when people say, we'll just defund the police or we'll reduce the number of police officers and we'll channel that money to community operations, there are consequences. They are unintended consequences, but they shouldn't be unexpected because we understand that as well. Just before we take a break for today and come back tomorrow, by the way, tomorrow we'll spend some time talking about the impact of the coronavirus and especially the lockdowns on things like addiction. That will be one of the interviews we'll be doing tomorrow, as well as, of course, looking at the second night of the Republican convention. But one of the breakthroughs has been the use of convalescent plasma. What is that? That's plasma from individuals that have been able to successfully treat and cure themselves through doctors' help, COVID-19, to take that plasma and then provide it to other individuals, because this plasma is then, of course, carrying the antibodies, which will help an individual maybe with a weak immune system develop a stronger immune response by infusing them with plasma containing antibodies from patients that recovered. Does that make sense? And so this has been used really since the 19th century to treat infectious diseases like smallpox, the Spanish flu, Ebola, H1N1, SARS, MERS, things like that. And the decision that was made by the president was to actually provide an emergency use of this through the FDA. Unfortunately, I love what the Wall Street Journal points out. Ignore Trump's tweet. This is the right decision. Because the president sent out a tweet over the weekend saying that he's convinced that the deep state in the Food and Drug Administration is thwarting the development of therapies and vaccines in order to sabotage his reelection. Well, I don't believe that, but nevertheless, that's what he said. But to quote the president on things we do agree with, he said the delivery of these treatments and vaccines to save lives are actually removing unnecessary barriers and delays by not cutting corners, but by marshaling the full power of the federal government. He said we provided $48 million to fund the Mayo Clinic study that tested the efficacy of convalescent plasma on patients with the virus. Through the study, over 100,000 Americans have already enrolled to receive this treatment, and it is proven to reduce mortality by 35%. Today, the president said, I once again urge all Americans who have recovered from the virus to go to coronavirus.gov and sign up to donate plasma today. So that's an action item that you can take as well. And if nothing else, this plasma therapy seems to be very successful and is an opportunity for you to maybe pay back or pay forward some of the good that you have benefited from. And so, again, the Food and Drug Administration approved this treatment for emergency use. The study that we were talking about there is because we don't really have at this point kind of the gold standard. You have 2 randomized placebo trials, but they're kind of inconclusive. So they're hoping to have a better study because right now a lot of this comes from observational studies or clinical trials. And so once again, trying to move things as quickly as possible without threatening the health of individuals. So another possible effective treatment, which we've talked about before, and in large part made possible because the president's been willing to cut some of the FDA regulations and move forward. So let's see where that takes us in the future. Tonight, of course, the second night of the Republican National Convention. I'll come back here tomorrow and we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as talking about the issue of addictions. Of course, we've already talked about suicides that have happened during the pandemic and the lockdown. Some really important issues that we need to address as well. If you find yourself saying, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more about some of these books we've talked about, The Devil and Karl Marx, we have the link there. Get it both in hardback and Kindle. And, of course, a more fun book by Eric Metaxas, Donald and the Fake News. And, of course, you can also go to his website, get some of his other more meaty books. All of those are available at our website, pointofview.net. And, of course, some of the articles I've mentioned. Why Not Cancel Karl Marx? The Election is About Security. One that I didn't get to, Public Education and Social Control. I'd encourage you to read those and maybe pass them on to other people in your sphere of influence. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.